Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 1 quarterback rankings for the 2021 fantasy football season. On today's episode, of course, we're talking about all things related to the quarterback position, beginning with matchups. We'll talk about which defenses last season were giving up the most points to opposing quarterbacks on a weekly basis, on average, in a 4-point per passing touchdown format. Of course, giving you perspective as to which quarterbacks have the most advantageous or perhaps the most disadvantageous matchups going into Week 1 based on what we saw last year, and of course, the accumulated changes of the offseason, free agents, rookies being added to said defenses. Then after that, of course, we want to talk about my top 16 quarterback rankings, giving you guys some perspective as to how I think the quarterback position currently stacks up going into Week 1. Of course, I wanted to talk about 16 quarterbacks in total because for those of you who play in an extended 14 to 16 team league, I of course want to give you guys some perspective, and perhaps one of these quarterbacks that I mentioned are guys that are available or perhaps on your roster so you have an understanding as to where you're going to go this week. But before we begin, I of course want to thank you guys for the incredible support. Just recently today, surpassed 46,000 subscribers here on the channel. Of course, our goal to 50K is continuing to get there. I cannot thank you guys enough for just being viewers of the channel, supporting every day by just watching my content. Of course, clicking the like button down below, commenting, engaging with the community, whether it is down in the comment section or via the Discord server that is also down in the description. Outside of that, guys, I mean, for those of you who haven't yet already subscribed to the channel, I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to helping you win a 2021 fantasy football championship. We're making content every single day for the entirety of the 2021 fantasy football season, weeks 1 through 18, setting you up for success in order to help you win, whether it is these rankings videos, the hidden gems that are coming on Friday, the matchup video on Saturday, the live streams on Sunday mornings, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, waiver wire episode on Monday, making sure that you're at the top of your league, top of your standings, and winning yourself a championship this year. Make sure you subscribe. Now, for those of you who are trying to find extra content besides the channel, you can go down in the description below and find my Patreon down there. For those of you who have already supported there, I cannot thank you enough. But for those of you who are trying to find the flex rankings that you can't find anywhere else, that would be via Patreon in order to set yourself up for success starting Week 1. All right, now that we've covered that, again, down in the description of the video, if you're down there, there are timestamps. I'm going to be talking and having all 16 timestamps for all quarterbacks for those of you who are interested. But we have to begin by talking about matchups going into Week 1 of the 2021 fantasy football season. As you can see to the left of me, that is the 2020 quarterback strength of schedule, and giving you some perspective as to which defenses were giving up the most points to opposing quarterbacks in a 4-point per passing touchdown format last season between weeks 1 through 17. Of course, the Detroit Lions, the Atlanta Falcons, the New York Jets, the Jaguars, Tennessee Titans, these are teams that we were going after every single week last year, and it shouldn't be a surprise. I mean, considering the fact that the Detroit Lions, in every single category that we've talked about this week, of course, running back, wide receiver, and now quarterback, they have been amongst the top 3 in terms of giving up the most points, and that's probably going to continue to persist throughout the season. But we're not really in the business of starting a Jimmy Garoppolo. I still think that there are 16 better options, but for those of you who play in a 2 QB league, this is a week in which you want to start a quarterback of that caliber. Though he isn't one of the better quarterbacks in the National Football League, he's got an incredible advantage in terms of his matchup and could potentially exploit that for some great fantasy production. Now, when we look across this board, of course, a lot of the quarterbacks that we're going to be mentioning today are guys that you may only have one quarterback on your roster because you drafted Patrick Mahomes and he's an automatic start, and that's the reason why he is on the thumbnail. But of course, I'm still going to give you guys my perspective on it, how I think they're going to produce, and exactly what we expect to see from them in that given week. But as we look down the board, of course, there are going to be some quarterbacks that have some iffier matchups. Like, for example, Josh Allen playing against the Pittsburgh Steelers, Justin Herbert playing against the Washington football team. These are matchups that are difficult, and that is without a doubt in my mind. But from what we saw from Josh Allen when he played against the Pittsburgh Steelers in Week 14 of last season, that gives us confidence. From what we've seen Justin Herbert produce against some of the tougher defenses in the National Football League in his rookie year without Austin Eckler, with, of course, Keenan Allen being injured for the back end of the season, with a terrible offensive line. There's a lot of factors and a lot of variables to take into account. And though this may be the case in terms of the strength of schedule of last season, I don't believe it's going to influentially impact some of these quarterbacks because a lot of them are matchup proof. But we're going to go on ahead and we're going to talk about my top 16 rankings. Just wanted to throw this up on the board to give you some context. Again, teams like the Las Vegas Raiders, Tennessee Titans, Seattle Seahawks, Cleveland Browns, these are some of the worst teams. Houston Texans, in terms of their overall defense and stopping opposing quarterbacks. We'll refer back to this during the episode, but I wanted to go ahead and, of course, like I typically do, present it. All right, so I want to go ahead and begin by talking about my number one quarterback on the week. It is going to be Lamar Jackson playing against the Las Vegas Raiders. Though many of you may think, man, I really thought Patrick Mahomes was going to be number one. Lamar Jackson, far and away, in my opinion, has the best overall matchup, considering the fact that, again, he's playing against the Las Vegas Raiders. They've given up the 6th most points to opposing quarterbacks last season, and we're giving up a bunch of points. In fact, in the top 5 to points to opposing running backs. And though Lamar Jackson isn't a running back, he does find a lot of his success from running the ball. I mean, when we look at just what exactly the Las Vegas Raiders were giving up last season in terms of points per game as a defense, they were giving up an average of 29.9 points to opposing offenses in the NFL last year. That's insane to me. On top of the fact that in the back end of the season, that defense completely fell apart and could not stop the run once again. And when you have an offense that is predicated on running the ball with your quarterback, Lamar Jackson averaging throughout his last 2 seasons at least 10 rushing attempts per game, I believe that this matchup against the Las Vegas Raiders is going to be extremely easy for them. Again, like I mentioned with Gus Edwards earlier in the week, this Las Vegas defense last season to CEH and Le'Veon Bell last year in the matchup, they gave up 30.3 fantasy points to those two. Ito Smith and Brian Hill went for a combined 21 points. Ty Johnson and Josh Adams of the New York Jets went for 26.1 together. Jonathan Taylor loaned back 29.5 fantasy points in rushing statistics. And of course, we had Melvin Gordon go for 19 points. This defense has been awful. And we're talking about a quarterback that as of the last 2 seasons, stride for stride with a Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes, has been one of the most consistent quarterbacks in the league. Last year, he averaged 22.78 fantasy points per game, and though that's a little bit down from the year prior, of course, his MVP season in 2019, I do think that he could get back to that stage, especially starting off hot with an incredible matchup. His tight end, Mark Andrews, his number 1 target, just got a fat contract. They're going to be celebrating, of course, scoring a lot of touchdowns there against the Raiders on Monday Night Football. Moving on to our number 2, we have Kyler Murray playing against the Tennessee Titans. Again, Kyler Murray is one of the best quarterbacks in the National Football League in the fantasy football perspective because of his rushing ability. Again, from weeks 1 through 10 of the 2020 season, we saw some incredible numbers. It was record-breaking, in fact, when we saw him averaging 30.16 fantasy points per game from weeks 1 through 10 of the 2020 season. He was on pace of becoming the highest scoring fantasy quarterback in a single season in the history of the game. And that in itself was surprising, but a lot of it had to do with the fact that he was consistently running the ball and finding a lot of success in doing so. In fact, throughout those 10 weeks, he was averaging about 9.7 rushing attempts per game, 67.1 rushing yards per game, and 1.1 rushing touchdowns per game. So the fact that he was getting a minimum of 12 fantasy points per game just from the rushing statistics alone. I mean, in a normal 4-point per passing touchdown league, a guy like Tom Brady is going to have to throw an extra 3 touchdowns in order to compensate for the differential between the rushing statistics that this man was able to garner. And yes, he did have a little bit less work in the passing game, but ultimately Kyler Murray was tearing the league apart last year. He unfortunately in the back half of the season dealt with some injuries, dealt with some tougher matchups, but going into this week, playing against the Tennessee Titans, again, the 5th easiest matchup based on last season's fantasy points per game allowed to quarterback. I mean, they gave up the 3rd most touchdowns in the National Football League last year to quarterbacks. They gave up on average 2.5 touchdowns to opposing quarterbacks a week. You have an offense with the Arizona Cardinals that improved their offensive line, brought in AJ Green, drafted Rondell Moore, and we have a Tennessee Titans defense that, in my opinion, and from what we've seen in terms of their grades, in terms of their overall productivity, they don't have a pass rush. So I don't really expect much out of this Tennessee defense. I know that they've tried to improve, but you can't get any worse than they were last year. Maybe they can go ahead and take some steps forward, but I think Kyler Murray is going to be torching that defense and imposing his will, whether it is through the air or on the ground. They're going to find a lot of success. I talked about DeAndre Hopkins and his history against the Tennessee Titans defense. I think that's going to persist and, of course, help Kyler out this week a lot. Moving on to our number 3, we have Patrick Mahomes taking on the Cleveland Browns. Again, it is a very beneficial matchup for him. I know the Cleveland Browns have gone ahead and they've bolstered their defense, whether it is drafting linebacker, cornerback in the first couple rounds of the NFL draft, bringing in Jadeveon Clowney to follow up on the other side of Myles Garrett. There are a lot of things that they've gone ahead and improved. Of course, you bring in John Johnson, that's going to play safety for them, formerly of the Rams. They've made some improvements. That is without a question. But we're talking about the most consistent quarterback since 2018. The guy that's led the entire National Football League in total touchdowns in the regular season, which is 120 total. On top of the fact that in week 1s, in the last 3 seasons, 2018, 2019, and 2020, Patrick Mahomes always comes out on fire. In fact, he's averaged 282 passing yards and 3.33 passing touchdowns per game with 0 interceptions per game in the last 3 week ones of his NFL career. And his consistency hasn't stopped there. In 36 of his last 44 regular season games, he has scored 2 or more touchdowns. Of course, that's 81.81% of the time. Patrick Mahomes has been a stud in the National Football League, and it's without a question. You get a brand new offensive line. You, of course, get Clyde Edwards-Helaire back, who is going to be healthy. Of course, you do have Jerick McKinnon bringing in an extra depth at the backfield just in case. But ultimately, this is a Patrick Mahomes-led offense that is going to air it out. It's going to be a matter of whether or not the Cleveland Browns can come out and successfully and consecutively pull together drives in which they're running the ball, keeping the ball away from Mahomes, and killing clock. That's the only way to successfully defeat Patrick Mahomes now that he has a fully healthy and functioning offensive line. Outside of that, you got to hold on for your dear life. Good luck to the Cleveland Browns this week. Either way, Patrick Mahomes, an absolute stud of a play every single week. Moving on to our number 4 quarterback on the week, we have Tom Brady. The defending Super Bowl champion Tampa Bay Buccaneers will be playing against the Dallas Cowboys tomorrow night on Thursday Night Football. Just to give you my prediction, I do expect the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to win that game. I don't know by how many points, I don't know the spread, but I do expect them to win that game relatively comfortably, because despite how much the Dallas Cowboys have theoretically improved their defense this offseason, there is a lot of holes that they needed to fill, and I don't think that they patched them all up. And ultimately, that is going to be exposed by Tom Brady and this Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense. Though the Dallas Cowboys only gave up the 14th most points to opposing quarterbacks last season, a lot of that had to do with the fact that they were getting scored on relatively consistently and early. And, many offenses just had to run the clock out in the second half. Didn't really have to utilize their quarterback position. But now you have Tom Brady coming into town, obviously trying to make a statement in week 1 of the 2021 season. The last time we saw Tom Brady in the regular season, weeks 10 through 17 of the 2020 season, he was an unstoppable force, averaging 24.34 fantasy points per game. He gets an incredible matchup. And the statistic that I specifically found in regards to Dallas's defense, when Dallas is against a upper echelon quarterback, for example, Matt Ryan, Russell Wilson, Kyler Murray, Lamar Jackson, Ben Roethlisberger, Kirk Cousins, when they played against good quarterbacks last season, in every single scenario, they gave up a minimum of 3 touchdowns to that opposing quarterback. In the games in which they played against, Joe Schmoes, obviously they performed well on a defensive standpoint, but when they played against the 6 matchups that were obviously going to be tough for them, they did not succeed in any capacity. So I do expect Tom Brady with this offense, of course, has another offseason under their belt and more chemistry being built between each other. Regardless of what I heard about Chris Godwin yesterday, of course, that news pretty much broke as I was recording, so I couldn't adjust to it. But he is completely off the injury report. I think this offense is full go, and they're absolutely going to be able to handle that Dallas defense and pretty much impose their will all day. We have number 5, Aaron Rodgers. Now, Aaron Rodgers took on the New Orleans Saints last season, and though the New Orleans Saints, they given up the 5th fewest points to the opposing quarterback last season, they really could not stop Aaron Rodgers. In fact, in week 3, in the matchup against one another, Aaron Rodgers went for 283 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns, 0 interceptions, and 24.52 fantasy points. All in all, that was an incredible performance. Last season, of course, Aaron Rodgers won the NFL MVP, having himself a total of 51 touchdowns, 48 passing touchdowns, in fact. But let's not forget, last season, week 3, he didn't even have Devontae Adams. He was able to do that with Allen Lazard, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, and those were his receivers. Obviously, Bob Tunyon was able to get himself a receiving touchdown in that contest. But we have Aaron Rodgers now with his number 1 prime receiver in a matchup that he's already been able to dominate just 12 months ago. So going into this upcoming week with so much of an instability in regards to what exactly we expect from that New Orleans Saints offense, if New Orleans isn't able to put drives together and they continue to punt the ball and give Aaron Rodgers good field positioning, he is going to exploit them and absolutely torch that defense, regardless of how good that pass rush is and whether or not he has David Bakhtiari as his left tackle, which obviously he's not going to have this week. But they were still able to manage by shuffling their offensive line a little bit. I know they're a little bit young up front, but I do believe Aaron Rodgers, this offense, fully healthy week 1, they're out to make a statement. And they're definitely going to be able to do some damage to that New Orleans defense. Number 6 is Josh Allen. I mean, look, Josh Allen is one of the best quarterbacks in fantasy. Number 2 ranked, in my opinion, this offseason in terms of who you wanted to draft at the quarterback position. But going into this Pittsburgh Steelers matchup, I'm not 100% bought in on the idea that he can just destroy this defense. I mean, last season when they played against the Pittsburgh Steelers in Week 14, his passing completion percentage wasn't great. He had 2 passing touchdowns, sure, 238 passing yards, got himself 28 rushing yards on the ground, ended up getting 19 fantasy points, just shy of 20. But ultimately, yes, we're probably going to see a 20-point performance out of Josh Allen, but I don't expect those insane 3 passing touchdown, 50 rushing yards with a rushing touchdown kind of game. I don't expect to see that because Pittsburgh's defense is good. They get their middle linebacker back. Of course, they had a lot of injuries last season. TJ Watt is practicing. I know there's a lot of rumors on whether or not he's going to play because, of course, he hasn't gotten his contract established, but I'm sure they're going to take care of him. He's practicing already this week. That defense is going to be full form. And when they played against each other last year, that was the downward slope of the Pittsburgh Steelers. They were always, they were getting killed week to week to week after that Washington football team game in which they absolutely blew the lead. And then they played against Cincinnati and lost. And then they lost to Buffalo. It was just a slide for that team. I think starting off, it's going to be a little bit tougher for Josh Allen. But regardless, of course, we know how much talent he has, how much talent this offense has as a whole. With Beasley, Gabriel Davis, of course, Stephon Diggs, adding Emmanuel Sanders, one of the better offensive lines in the league. I think he'll be just perfectly fine as my number 6. Number 7 is Russell Wilson this week. So I'm assuming that they're going to let Russ cook. That is my assumption through and through. The Indianapolis Colts defense, yes, is one of the better in the leagues, but they are extremely stout in terms of stopping the run. But they have given up some points here and there to opposing quarterbacks throughout the passing game. In specific, in 10 of their 16 games last year, they gave up 2 touchdowns in the passing game to opposing quarterbacks. So what do I expect from Russell Wilson, a guy that since 2018 has averaged 2.3 passing touchdowns per game? I honestly think that he's going to be able to take on this Indianapolis defense and have a higher scoring game, in my opinion. Typically, Russell Wilson comes out and starts on fire. I mean, what we saw last year in 2020, he came out, was at a 4 passing touchdown game and in back-to-back games of 5+ touchdowns. I don't expect it to be of that caliber, but I really do think that with this new offensive coordinator, bringing in a guy like Gerald Everett, having a healthy Chris Carson in the backfield, a little bit more of a solidified offensive line due to the moves that they've made this offseason, I think Russell Wilson is going to get ready to cook and put this defense on the back burner. I mean, to be honest, it is going to be a high-scoring one. It's a matter of whether or not the Indianapolis Colts can keep up with them, because I really do think that the Seattle Seahawks offense is going to be significantly better than what we've seen in years past based on just their offensive coordinator and mentality of their approach. Moving on to our number 8 quarterback on the week, we have Ryan Tannehill taking on the Arizona Cardinals. Okay, so as we all know, I always talk about it, Ryan Tannehill is one of the most consistent quarterbacks in the National Football League since taking the job in 2019 from Marcus Mariota. He has been, in the last 26 games, besides Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, the 3rd highest scoring quarterback in fantasy football in a 4-point per passing touchdown format. Yes, he does get to play against the Arizona Cardinals, but I'm not considering that big of a deal. To be honest, yes, they've added J.J. Watt. They get Chandler Jones back. This offensive line has dealt with J.J. Watt. They've played against him twice a year for the last couple of years. Chandler Jones is coming off an injury, but they have Taylor Lewan back, so they're going to be able to cancel each other out. And in my opinion, just seeing what Ryan Tannehill has produced over the last 26 games, in 24 of the last 26 games that he's played during the regular season, he has scored a minimum of 2 touchdowns. That is unbelievable considering how effective he has been. Of course, in the last 2 seasons, has scored 11 rushing touchdowns, which of course helps that number overall because, again, he does have the ability to be mobile. And what this offense has done, taking Ryan Tannehill from an Adam Gase offense and transforming him into a completely different quarterback and changing the trajectory of his career. Of course, there are questions on whether or not this offense is going to be good enough without Arthur Smith now that he is the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons, but I truly do believe that this offense is going to be in good hands. They bring in, of course, Julio Jones, which we really haven't heard a lot about this offseason. A lot of people aren't really talking about the Tennessee Titans. Maybe they're just assuming that they're going to be good up front and they're going to be, solid in terms of running the ball and being able to feed their 2 stud all-pro wide receivers. I expect that to be the case. I expect this contest, because of how good Kyler Murray is going to be, it's going to force, of course, the Tennessee Titans to have to throw a lot, and they'll find success because of what they have in terms of weapons. Moving on to our number 9, we have Jalen Hurts playing against the Atlanta Falcons. Since taking the starting job in late 2020, Jalen Hurts has been a pretty consistent quarterback, averaging 23.74 fantasy points per game in a 4-point per passing touchdown format. Like I've mentioned, of course, in those 4 contests, scoring 3 rushing touchdowns, having over 250 rushing yards, that is obviously going to set you up for success, and we know what he's capable of doing. He's a great running mobile quarterback, but he's also going to be able to get it done through the air because the Atlanta Falcons gave up 40 touchdowns to opposing quarterbacks last season. I mean, that number is staggering. On top of the fact that Jalen Hurts is going to have the improvement of bringing in Devonta Smith. You get back a healthy, of course, as Zach Ertz. I know he wasn't healthy all of last season, and even once he returned, he was a little bit hesitant in terms of everything. The offensive line is far more improved, like I've talked about all offseason. And when we look at the matchup against the Atlanta Falcons, they were giving up the 5th most rushing yards to opposing quarterbacks last season, mainly because of those 2 games against Taysom Hill. Taysom Hill with the New Orleans Saints had 2 games in which he started against this defense, and he was able to torch them for 50 minimum yards a game on the ground. I think there's a very good possibility that the Philadelphia Eagles go watch that film and try to implement exactly what Taysom Hill was doing, whether it is scramble yards or designed runs. We've already seen this team be able to find effectiveness last year. Of course, it's going to be a different coaching staff, but I think overall the offense is going to be significantly improved based on the personnel and playing against a defense that really hasn't been great in the last couple of years, and though they're trying to improve, they're not going to be able to stop Jalen Hurts. My number 10 is Matthew Stafford, and though I don't have him in a Rams jersey, it's mainly because he didn't play the preseason. That's what Sean McVay does. He never plays his starters during the preseason because he's trying to keep them healthy for when the regular season begins and when they're trying to win a championship. And this upcoming week, when they play against the Chicago Bears on Sunday Night Football, I expect them to deliver a message to the entire league. Specifically, obviously, with the fact that Matthew Stafford in a new offense is going to be significantly better because his offensive line's improved, the receiving core, everything as a whole. He doesn't have to worry about his defense giving up 40 points a game. These are things that now he will have the ability to at least use play action, have extra components to this offense that perhaps he didn't have in Detroit. Now, when I talk about him playing against Chicago, again, I mentioned it yesterday with the wide receiver position. Matthew Stafford, in the last 2 games that he's played against Chicago, he's averaged 350 passing yards and 2 passing touchdowns per game. Obviously, that's fantastic. Hopefully, we can see something similar to that. On top of the fact that Chicago's number 1 cornerback, Kyle Fuller, is not going to be with the team anymore. He is with the Denver Broncos this upcoming season. That, in my opinion, continues to lean the advantage, obviously, in the direction of Matthew Stafford and this offense. I expect them to really put in some work, mainly because I don't anticipate the Chicago Bears finding much productivity on the offensive side of the ball. Of course, that defense for the Rams is great for a reason, and they've continued to shut down offenses week over week due to that. Of course, Andy Dalton isn't one of the best quarterbacks in the National Football League, and though he does have pieces like Robinson or Mooney or Montgomery around him, Komet, of course, Jimmy Graham, it's not going to potentially lead to their ultimate success this week, which in my opinion leads to, of course, the Los Angeles Rams having the ball in their possession majority of the time, and of course allowing Matthew Stafford to just torch this defense as he has done in years past. My number 11 is Dak Prescott playing against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, the reason why I have Dak at this current juncture is because I don't know what to expect from this offense without Zach Martin. I know Zach Martin not in that offense. You may be thinking it's only one offensive lineman. Zach Martin is the best player on that team. Far and away, it's not even close. In terms of how proficient he is at his given position, he's the best player on that team. And losing that at your right guard position, considering the fact that you're playing against the pass rush that not only has Shaq Barrett, Jason Pierre-Paul, Vita Vea, Ndamukong Suh, you have a lot of pressure coming in the direction of Dak Prescott. And as I anticipate the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to score relatively easily, like we talked about with Tom Brady earlier on in today's episode, I do expect that the Dallas Cowboys are going to have to score a lot in the second half via the passing game. And if in fact Dak Prescott is going to be forced out of the pocket, we're going to truly test whether his ankle is ready to go, because he's going to be running for his life at times. But regardless of that, I still think that he is going to be productive enough because the garbage time is going to be in his favor. They're going to score a lot of points via the passing game because he is a good quarterback. He's got great weapons, and they're going to let it fly. Prior to his injury in 2020, of course, he was averaging over 30 fantasy points per game in a 4-point per passing touchdown format. At the quarterback position, that is extremely rare. We talked about it with Kyler. You never see that. But if he can come back and pick up exactly where he left off, just slinging the rock and completely dominating regardless of what his defense was capable of doing, especially against a defense as formidable as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, bringing back all 11 of their defensive starters, I think Dak Prescott could start on the right foot, but in my opinion, at this current moment in time, I think I expect a little bit less from him based on the fact that, again, they're going to have to throw the entire time. It could force some mistakes here and there, and there's a lot of rust that needs to be knocked off of his shoulder specifically. All right, we move on to our number 12. It is Justin Herbert. Look, I don't want anybody to worry about Justin Herbert. If he is your starting quarterback, he's playing this week because he has found success in the past against good defenses. And though the Washington football team is one of the better secondaries in the National Football League, bringing in William Jackson this offseason from the Cincinnati Bengals, continuing to improve their defense. Of course, their pass rush is one of the most nastiest in the league. But again, the Los Angeles Rams, they've improved their offensive line. They brought in a left tackle. They have a healthy right tackle now. They brought in an all-pro center. You continue to transform. You have a healthy Austin Eckler, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams combination, which you very seldom had last year. You bring in Jared Cook, and when he played against difficult defenses, specifically teams that weren't allowing a lot of points to opposing quarterbacks last season, Justin Herbert was able to thrive and find a lot of success. In fact, in the games against Tampa Bay, New Orleans, New England, Miami, Denver twice, and Buffalo, he averaged 19.5 fantasy points per game in a 4-point per passing touchdown format. Regardless of the tough matchup, I think and I believe Justin Herbert steps up to the competition that he's facing, and he's certainly going to be putting together a pretty good performance this week, in my opinion. That's why he's my number 12 in the last of my QB1 territory. We move on to our number 13, Matt Ryan. Again, Matt Ryan should be extremely improved this year based on the offensive coordinator and the entire offense as a whole. I really do think bringing in Mike Davis is going to help establish the run for 16 straight weeks, in which they didn't have last year. Of course, halfway through the season, Todd Gurley pretty much bowed out there. And of course, having a little bit more of an improved offensive line help. Playing against the Philadelphia defense is obviously a blessing, considering their secondary hasn't been great. You got Calvin Ridley and Kyle Pitts to take advantage of that. A little bit of Russell Gage will be sprinkled in here and there. But in my opinion, we're going to see Matt Ryan take that next step in terms of getting back to where he was, mainly because, of course, like I mentioned, Arthur Smith. When Ryan Tannehill went to the Tennessee Titans, we all thought Ryan Tannehill, he's a career backup for the rest of his career, because what we saw from him at Miami with Adam Gase wasn't nice. And though Matt Ryan didn't play with Adam Gase last year, and that wasn't his offensive coordinator, I do believe that the Dirk Cutter offense wasn't the right scheme for Matt Ryan. And now that you bring in the ability to use play action, the ability to use more tight ends and find bigger targets down the field, yes, you do lose Julio, but ultimately I think that the matchup and, of course, the improvements that this offense has made this offseason is going to lead to Matt Ryan's success. That's why he sits at 13. Number 14 is Kirk Cousins. Again, he might not be the sexiest play in all of fantasy football, but he is one of the most consistent in the National Football League. Last season, in 12 of his games, he produced 2 or more total touchdowns scored. Again, the consistency is there. When we're talking about quarterbacks that we're going to be playing all season long, that are going to be between these 13 to 16 range and may not be a top 12 quarterback every week, but is going to find consistency, you're going to find that with Kirk Cousins every single week based on just how this offense is constructed. And though they are losing Irv Smith, Conklin is going to fit in as the tight end and be pretty good. I mean, just look at the back end of the 2020 season. Conklin was able to play the tight end position even in games where Irv Smith was not producing and be a good tight end option. They do have enough weapons in this offense with Jefferson, Thielen, Cook, a little bit of Madison here and there. Of course, you have Conklin to get them in a scenario in which they're consistently winning games. And of course, their best aspect of their team is scoring. Their defense is obviously questionable and oftentimes gives up too many points per game. But in my opinion, against the Cincinnati Bengals, this should be one of the higher scoring games in week 1. Therefore, we have Kirk Cousins there. And on the other side of the coin, we have Joe Burrow as my number 15 overall quarterback. Again, like I mentioned, this is going to be one of the higher scoring matchups on the week. When we look at Joe Burrow getting back to football, I mean, we didn't anticipate based on when he got injured last year that he would be returning for week 1. I mean, we still have questions on Saquon Barkley, and Saquon Barkley was injured, 2 months prior. So there's just a lot of quick recovery here with Joe Burrow, regardless of how devastating of an injury that is. That's pretty insane to me. But again, we're going to have to see right off the rip whether he's ready to get back to it. Yes, he's got incredible receiving options, and this offense is way more improved than the offense he played in last year, especially offensive line-wise. I think Joe Burrow, again, he's a gunslinger for a reason. He's going to go out there and perhaps throw the most passing attempts out of all quarterbacks in week 1, in my opinion. They're going to truly have to keep up with Minnesota's offense, which is going to be tough to do considering how successful they're going to be able to run the ball through Cincinnati's defense. Of course, Joe Burrow is going to come out, him, Higgins, Boyd, Jamar Chase, maybe a little bit of a CJ Uzama. A lot of people are sleeping on that, are going to be able to connect and find themselves some success here in this offense. The last option I want to mention is Trevor Lawrence. Yes, the rookie quarterback makes my top 16 list this week because they play against the Houston Texans. The Houston Texans were giving up 29 points per game last season. I mean, that in itself, their defense is just not good. We know that. but neither is the Jacksonville Jaguars. Jacksonville was giving up 30.8 points per game last season as well. So their defenses are not good. This should be a higher scoring event between these two teams. And though we have Tyrod Taylor on one side with a hodgepodge of backup running backs and whatever receivers you want to throw out there, they're all professionals regardless. No matter how much value they have in the fantasy aspect, they're all professionals and they're going out to win on Sunday. And I expect the same thing on the other side of the ball from the Jacksonville Jaguars. Of course, considering I'm sure Urban Meyer wants to go ahead and get himself a victory in week 1. Darrell Bevell, of course, has experience with rookie quarterbacks. He was able to get Russell Wilson on an incredible start throughout his career. I think there's a very good chance that Trevor Lawrence comes out here in week 1 with, of course, the volume of receivers that he has with James Robinson and put up a great performance against a defense that, of course, isn't looking good. Those are my top 16 quarterback rankings for week 1 of the 2021 fantasy football season. Thank you everybody for watching. Again, if you would like more content, go down in the description, check out my Patreon. Again, if you haven't yet already, subscribe to the channel. Help us get to that goal of 50,000 subscribers. Click the like button down below. Be sure to comment down below and let me know what you guys think of today's rankings. Thank you again for watching. And until tomorrow, we'll talk about tight ends. I'll see you guys. Peace.